The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.
Hello, friends. I'm David Pasqualone, and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast, The Bronson Hill Story. Bronson is author of Fire Yourself. He's the host of the Mailbox Money Show, and you're going to hear his incredible journey from going as a child in a home of a single father, which was unusual for our generation, to growing up through high school and becoming a missionary and a youth pastor, and then meeting a woman, getting married, having a daughter, and then unfortunately having to go through a divorce. And he's going to talk about how he kept balance through life, ups and downs, and was able to reinvent himself through Christ, and how we can too. We're going to talk about the blessings of being fired and caught off guard. We're going to talk about the creating a passive income so you can live the life that God intended for you and that you can actually enjoy. There's going to be highs and lows, but it's how we can have that security financially. We're also going to talk about facing even the most difficult life challenges head on. So Bronson's a remarkable guy. You're going to love this interview. Get your pen and paper ready to take notes. And like our slogan says, don't just listen to this great content, but do it. Repeat it each day so you can have a great life in this world, but more importantly, an eternity to come. So before we go, I want to ask you to do one more thing. Share this episode with your friends and family, and also shop at MyPillow. MyPillow, you're going to get quality, probably the best quality you've ever bought. Sheets, pillows, mattress toppers, slippers, blankets, all sorts of things that I've personally used and love. And with promo code Remarkable, they're going to give you all of this up to 80% off retail. So you're going to go and shop MyPillow, get quality, amazing products that are comfy and cozy for your home, your family, and friends. Great gift ideas. And you're supporting our podcast so we can keep bringing you amazing content like this. You're also supporting the fine American organization at MyPillow and all the families that work there. And again, you're getting kick butt stuff for your home. So it's a triple win. So after this episode, maybe even pausing it before, go shop mypillow.com, use promo code Remarkable, enjoy and save, and let us know what you think. Now at this time, get ready for our friend Bronson Hill and enjoy this remarkable episode. Hey, Bronson, how are you, brother?
I'm well, David. Excited to be here, man. I had you on my show recently and excited to be on the Remarkable People podcast.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. I just told our listeners a little bit about you, but we are ready to jump into this episode, hear your story, the wisdom you've gleaned, and how we can all become better people and then help you on the way as well. How's that sound?
That sounds great, man. I love talking about how to make our lives better and ways we can grow and, in every single different area of our lives.
Awesome, man. So we're going to go through your life story, start to finish. We'll bring the conversation up to today, and then we'll transition to where's Bronson and where are you heading. So after you help us, we can help you. But before we get started, we have listeners from all over the world, different countries, different cultures. But if they were to listen to this entire episode, what is one truth that you guarantee they're going to get and they're going to be able to apply to their life when they listen?
I would say God has a plan for your life. That's a big one. I would say another one is when you make a goal, just making the goal can change your life. So there's two.
Amen. Yeah, there's no pressure, no right or wrong answer, but we want somebody to say, if I'm going to invest a half an hour of my life, what am I going to get out of this? Those are two great lessons. So where did you start, Bronson? How did this become so important? Because good, bad, or ugly, everything that happens to us in life makes us the men we are, the men we are today. So what was your upbringing like, my friend?
Yeah. So I grew up in Seattle, Washington. I live in LA now, but grew up in Seattle. Grew up in a home where both my parents were great people. They were imperfect people. They ended up getting divorced. And I actually grew up with my dad. So that was a little bit unusual, at least at the time. So my three siblings and I grew up with my dad, single dad. And so I'd see my mom every other weekend. And that was challenging as a kid growing up, missing my mom and not seeing her as much as I'd like. And so I, had some insecurities as a kid. I played a lot of sports, played a lot of football and baseball and basketball. And I was really good at football. So I really enjoyed that. And then, as I got older, really, came to faith at age 16, really had this experience. I'd been going to church. Faith is a big part of my story. And so I really believe that, God was out there and I'm here. And it was just like, if I was a good person, I wouldn't be struck by lightning. And, but I had this time where I was at this little church service with like 5 or 8 other high school students. And I felt like God was calling out to me saying, Bronson, I want you to follow me. And that was like, that completely changed everything about my life because I just had thought, oh, God's out there and I'm just kind of living independent of what he wants. And this was something that really brought me into like, wow, he loves me, he cares about me, he's got a plan for my life. And all the bad stuff somehow he can use for good. And so it just changed everything. And so I got really involved in my church. We started a Christian club at my public high school with 1,700 students. We had about 70 students coming every week, and so that was a great opportunity to get involved in leadership and kind of learn how to lead others. So we had a little band, we had all this stuff going just like at lunchtime at school, and they would announce it as a club, and so then later on I ended up becoming a youth pastor right after high school. Had just some great experiences there of just really seeing kids come to faith and just really being involved in different ways, and then but a lot of other things that happened. But I think those are some really critical things that happened to me when I was younger.
Now, to get you to go to church, was that something that your father started going to church? Did you just feel the need and go? You knew someone? How did you get into church where you heard about God's love?
Yeah, so I'd been going to church since I was, 5, all through growing up. So I'd heard about church, I'd been to church, I'd, prayed the prayer and everything. It just really didn't become personal. I remember there was a time I was in middle school, I would try reading the Bible because my dad would read the Bible, and I'd just try, and it just didn't make any sense to me until I had that experience when I was 16. And then it became like, oh, wow, like this actually makes sense. Like I actually understand that God loves me and all this stuff. Like this is not just a religion of like rules. It's like a relationship with, me talking and listening and him guiding me and caring about the things in my life. And it began to change everything. So I did have this base of, going to vacation Bible school and going to Sunday school in the mornings, and we'd go every week. And then when I got to be in middle school, I started to see some of my insecurities. And of course, middle school is just a time looking back where I know very few people that say, I just had looking back on my life, the middle school years were just some of the best years of my life. I don't know anybody who's actually necessarily said that. So for me, it was a really tough time, challenging, awkward, all the stuff. And so then when I got to be in high school, I kind of saw my life going in a couple of different directions. And then when I really found God, it just really changed everything for me, for sure.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. A lot of people go to church and have religion, but until you have a relationship, it's not real. It's empty. So that's cool. So your dad, despite being a single dad, he took you guys to church each week and got you involved and try to show you the base that God's real and loves you.
Yeah. Yeah. He modeled it. He was was a great guy and modeled things. And of course, with my parents, there were challenges there. And of course, my mom was not, my parents were divorced. So there was seeing her and kind of going through some hurts with that and things like that. But I think, yeah, I mean, I think both my parents, they're imperfect, but they modeled the best they could and did what they could. And, my dad was a great example in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And then even though you live with your dad, what was your relationship with your mom at that point?
So I'd see her every other weekend. As a kid, I wanted to see her more. It wasn't enough time. I think I would have loved to see her every day or if I'd see her a lot more often. So I'd see her every other weekend. And so that was hard. That was hard feeling emotionally close and then all of a sudden just not having her around. So I think for me, as I've gotten older, I've realized, just from a faith point of view, that just realizing God can heal wounds, he can heal deep things in our heart. And also it takes work and time to go back and really feel those emotions, feel the loss of both the gladness I have for my dad and my mom, but also the things that lacked and the things that weren't there, and really allow myself to feel those things because they are important. And the more I've kind of done both of those things, been grateful as well as just, being willing to feel the emotions, I think it made me a more complete person. And I've had to really work on, I think my dad's great at like getting things done and kind of like, being successful in life and achieving and all that. But the emotional stuff is like, he probably even acknowledged like, yeah, it's been a little more of a journey to grow in that stuff. And so, just some of the stuff work I've done on my own and just in friendships and relationships and therapy and just some of the growth stuff has been really powerful to just help me, I think, become a more complete person.
Amen. So now you're a teenager. You start going to church, but you have a relationship with Christ. Where does your life go from there, Bronson?
Yeah, well, I think that, at that point, I really sensed just a lot of different possibilities. Like I didn't know, okay, God's got a plan, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And it went from being excited about, okay, girls and business and other things I wanted to do, and just being more like, okay, well, God, what do you want? What do you want for my life? And so I had applied I played a lot of golf, and I applied to play golf for in college. I was in high school. I was a decent golfer, and I wasn't good enough to play in college. But I thought, oh, I'll go walk on. And I went to this it was like a second or third tier school, and the way it turned out is I didn't even get into this school, and so the door totally shut. And it just looking back to this day, I mean, I ended up getting in later to like a top 10 business school, and so it's just kind of odd that like this happened the way it did. But again, I just believe sometimes God will shut a door and it doesn't always have to make sense. It's like we can try to figure out our path, but we can't always figure it out. And so I think for me, what really opened up just, in a lot of ways was just possibility and joy and just, opportunities to serve and just this whole new kind of eternal perspective. Because I think if you look at things in life, I've just realized a lot of things happen in life that are disturbing. And if we think about it, like things we get upset about, being stuck in traffic, or, somebody says something or does something, or we lose some money or whatever the thing is, a lot of times, I think about, will this matter in 2 months? And then I think, will it matter in 5 years? And then will it matter after I die? Will it matter in eternity? And most of the time, the answer when you get the last question, it's like, well, no. So well, like, I get down about things that like really don't even in the long term really matter. But so it's just, again, having kind of a new perspective on things and being able to kind of change your approach and the way you think about life and people and faith and all the things.
Yeah. So now you're going to school. You get into college. You said you get into a top 10 business school. And are you active in the church? What's your position? How's the balance on your life? Because a lot of times we get into college, we can go one polarity or the other. Where did you go, Bronson?
So yeah, so after high school, I was planning just to take the summer, but I didn't get into the college. So I was called Western Washington University, and up in Bellingham the Canadian border. So I didn't get in. So I actually took the whole year and just kind of worked to the church. I had a 2-year degree. So they have this thing where you could do your last 2 years of high school, you could do college courses. And so I graduated with a 2-year degree in college from high school, which was amazing. So I was able to get both done at the same time, which was awesome. So I took a year off. I was still a year ahead. Then I decided to go to this Bible school or this Christian school, went there for a year. And that was, there's a lot of great things about that. But during that year, I haven't really been on a podcast like this where we share all these stories, so it's nice to be able to share this stuff. But I had this feeling of like something just didn't feel settled. It didn't really feel right. And so I didn't know what it was. And I was just like, okay, I'm not sure what this is. And so I had a talk with my dad. I actually went for a little walk around the neighborhood. I think at the time I was, 19 or 20 years old. And he just reminded me of like, Hebrews chapter 11 that says like the idea of the hall of faith, where you can take your life and say, I'm going to be like this person. I'm going to model it after this person, whether you're a person of faith or not. We can try to model after other people. And he was just saying, why don't you just be open and just ask God what he wants you to do? So I came back and I prayed and I was like, okay, Lord, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And I just, for the first time, had this sense that I was supposed to go to Africa and I was supposed to go serve in Africa. So I was like, man, well, I've never thought that before, like it's probably that's not me. That's probably not the devil saying, I want you to go serve in Africa. Maybe it's God, So then I was open to that. I ended up going to Africa about 5-6 months later. And I served there in Uganda for about 5-6 months and had just an amazing time. I mean, just really opened my eyes to the world. I went on that trip. I'd only been to Canada and Mexico. And then I came back from that trip and I'd been to like, I think an additional 11 countries or something, because I went to 4 countries in Africa, and then I think it was like 7 more countries in Europe. So it was just really opened my eyes to the world, and that was, I mean, it's hard to describe what that trip did for me, but I think a few things is it kind of something in me kind of died. They talk about dying to self, right? Dying to what you want, to live it, basically if you're living, it's not for yourself, it's living for someone else. And I just had a moment where I was like, okay, well, if this is it, if, let's say I were to get sick and get malaria and die or something like it's okay because I'm living the life that God wants me to live. I'm doing what he wants me to do. And so I've carried that with me. I'm just like, I'll do, if I know it's God, like I'll do whatever he wants me to do. I don't always get there right away. I don't always like respond, but if I know it's him, like I really want to do whatever he wants me to do.
Amen.
So
That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. Do it and do it fast. Now, not all of us, like you said, not all of us listen right away, but God's patient and loving, thankfully. So let me
yeah.
ask you a question, Bronson. What year was it when you were in Washington before you went to the mission field? Because I was up there. I lived in, where Cedar Woolley is and Mount Vernon.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I lived up there
Okay.
2004 to 2007. Were you in
Okay.
that area then, or was this before
Um,
that?
it was just before, yeah. So I graduated high school in 99 and then I left in 2003 to move to LA. So I think I went to Africa in 2002, I think January of 2002. So right before you were there, but that area has exploded in growth. There's been a lot more population growth in that area. Cedar Woolley and all that stuff's really boomed for
Yeah, I
sure.
lived up there. I ran a company and helped out. And then, yeah, that's actually area where, for those around the world, even though he's in Washington State at that point in his life, he's closer to Vancouver, Canada than he was Seattle, Washington. I mean, it's about a closer drive to get into Canada. So awesome, man. So now you're about 20 years old. It's before college. You're in the mission field. You're in Africa. Obviously, a totally different experience and worldview, frame of life than you're used to. When you were out there, did you know people? Did you just go cold and meet missionaries? How did that relationship work out?
So yeah, so I came back to my pastor at the church, and it was a small church I was serving as the youth pastor at, and I just said, "Hey, I feel like I'm supposed to go to Africa." And he was at first they were a little bit like, "Hey, you're serving here," like, and then but I said,
Yeah.
"But no, this is what I feel like God's spoken to me." So they were like, "Okay, well, let's see what we can do to help you." And so there were some missionaries in the denomination I was in that were, I think they were coming around, or he kind of did some networking, found they could swing by. So it was just a few months later, a couple months later, or something, they came by and they were in Uganda. And so I got to meet them. And so when I went over, I didn't go over with like a group of people. I didn't go over with like a big group of like young missionaries or anything. I went over with, I was 21 years old and these missionaries were like in their mid 50s. So I kind of just lived with them and it was, there was a lot of awesome things about it. There were some things that were really challenging, just some health stuff. There was some of, honestly kind of boredom, just kind of like, okay, what actually am I doing over here exactly? And they're like, well, you're only here 5 months. Like, we're not going to like give you a role because that's not long enough. You would have had to stay for a year or two to really have like a long-term role. And so I was just kind of over there. So I did some student, like I'd go to schools, and this is kind of a funny story. I was playing around with, I was a musician, and I was playing with the worship kind of choir one night, and we're kind of goofing around on the keyboard and singing and whatever. And we get in the car the next day, like, oh, we're going to the school, and they have a Bible club there, and we're going to do the dance team's going to dance, whatever. But then later, Cephas is going to play the keys, so you can play the keyboard, and you're going to rap. And so I had kind of joked that like, oh yeah, I can rap, whatever. And then I'm thinking like, okay, a Bible club, there'd probably be like 20, 30 kids. I get there, David, and there are 300 kids at this Bible club. And they hand me a mic and we get on the keys and I just do my best. And I'm really freestyle rapping and just having a fun time. They were very gracious, but it was definitely quite an experience to be in Uganda, Africa, rapping in a public high school over there. It was fun.
Nice. And then where does your life go from there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Where does your life go from there? What's the next natural transition from that? Well, I came back, was back at the church in Seattle for a year, and then
If you
uh,
don't mind me asking, which church was it?
it was a Foursquare church. So Foursquare is a denomination. It's like a charismatic denomination, kind of like Assemblies of God or something like that. So it's similar to that, or
I've
even
heard
Calvary
of it,
Chapel.
but I'm not familiar with it. So,
Yeah, yeah. So they have churches all over, and it's like a Calvary Chapel or Assemblies of God or things like that. But it was good. So I came back to Seattle, and then again, just through a series of events, there was an opportunity in LA to be an intern. I think at the time I was 23, so I came down and I interned at Foursquare Missions. The church central office was in LA. And so I did some mission stuff with them. And then I was really considering going back to Africa for 2 years to do some like church planting work in South Africa. And so I was kind of waiting for the missionary to be ready. And then I ended up not doing it. It's funny. I think some people listening to this that are listening, like they know me for like my business. This is like I usually don't tell these stories. So it just feels kind of fun to be telling these stories that I never really tell. But anyway, so that door ended up closing. I ended up just kind of working in LA at like a public high school for a little bit, just as kind of helping out, doing some stuff, trying to figure out what the next thing was, and lived with some family. Finished. I ended up not like I had a couple years left from school, but I was able to transfer some units over. I finished through distance learning, just lived with some family in Orange County, California, worked at a restaurant, finished up, and then just through a series of experiences, really felt like I should go to Fuller Seminary, which is in Pasadena. And so I came back to do that, kind of the idea of preparing to go, whether it's going to, a missions place or just how I'm already going. And so the theme for my life since then has been like, well, I just feel like I think if you're somebody who follows God, everybody's called to be a light and be a blessing and be a help and be in ministry. It just may not be working at a church. You're doing a ministry now by doing this. And so I ended up coming back to the Pasadena area where I live now and just went to Fuller. And then they asked me to be for the denomination, they asked me to be the youth missions director or the youth missions administrator. So I did that, had interns then at that point and went on a bunch of trips and had a lot of fun with that. And then did a little more ministry, became a youth pastor again. And then, gosh, I feel like I've lived a few lives here already, just even on this, so far on the show.
Yeah, no. And then while you're doing this, are you still single at this point?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you're
still
still single. So
Still
that's
single.
always interesting. Anytime you're in any kind of church setting or leadership setting, women just flock to any kind of position of power or leadership. So to stay pure in a Christian world, it's hard. And then if
Yeah.
you're working with the youth, sometimes it's even harder because there's just not a lot of wisdom in young girls and boys. And then you're the leader. So how did you balance and protect the boundaries? Because this is something that young people coming up or people who are in that
Yeah.
position, how did you protect the boundaries of keeping yourself pure and making sure lines weren't crossed as a single youth pastor?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, to be honest, when I was growing up, there were some things that happened. We got into some relatives' porn stash. And so that was kind of a thing for me that I wrestled with through my teenage years of just being addicted to porn. And it's unfortunate. It's so common and it's so accessible now. But, for me, it was something that I definitely wrestled with. As I got older, I mean, I think to be honest, when it came to women, I was kind of just aloof to a lot of the stuff. I mean, I dated different people and but I really tried, I felt like with that, I really wanted to wait, until I was married to be sexually involved with somebody. And so I did, so I really waited and just did my best to, but and I think also I had a lot of goals. When I came back from Africa, I started writing music. So when I was in LA back going to Fuller, I was writing music, I was playing shows, I was involved in different things. So I just try to kind of keep myself focused on what my goals were. And I had some relationships. I'd date a girl for 3 or 4 months or whatever. Then I'd see someone. I kind of, but I think for me it was just about what's going to be the most beneficial thing here. If you're, and I think this is the thing that really helps people when it comes to boundaries and really what their goals are. It's just if you're trying to build a relationship, you're building a house. You don't want to build a house and have a crappy foundation, right? Because the whole house won't be able to stand. And I think when it comes to just the things that you put in a relationship, if you're putting things in there that are kind of out of place or things that you're crossing lines, it's like you're not going to be able to build really what you want to build. And it's the whole sowing and reaping. If I want to reap something great, now if I want to reap love and kindness and joy and peace and stuff, I've got to follow God's way and I've got to honor him in that. And if I don't, then I'm putting things in there in the foundation or in the building of the house that are not going to last. And so, and not that I've done it perfectly, but I think that was something that I really tried to say, well, I want to do this the right way. And so something was very important to me. So I was not married at the time. I ended up taking it. After about a year and a half and being almost done at Fuller Seminary, I decided to take a job like a mega church, like a large church, being the high school youth pastor there, and I got about 200 kids. And so I moved out to Montana of all places and took a job there and enjoyed that. Had been dating at the time. My who became my wife, she was in San Diego, and so we dated long distance, and did end up getting married while I was living there. So we lived there together for a year, and so that was basically living in Montana and those cold winters and nice people, and there was a lot, there's a different pace of life over there. And then after about a year and a half of being there, I've never been fired from a job, David, but they came to me out of the blue right after Christmas break. We literally just got back from Christmas, like being back with family, and they called me on a Friday and they're like, "Yeah, we just don't think it's a good fit, and your last day is Tuesday." And it was just like shocking, like, oh, I
Wow.
didn't get feedback. Yeah, I bought a house here, I got married. I like, what in the world? And so that was a real challenging season for me because I just had such a dream of wanting to be in ministry and really wanted to either be a pastor or help people or do things in this space, and to be kind of kicked off the boat or off the island, that was very defeating.
Yeah, and let's stop there because all of us get just taken out by a left hook that nobody sees coming, right? So
Yeah.
you're married, you go on Christmas vacation, you're planning for the next year in your brain, and then like it's not the right fit. So
Yeah.
what were the steps looking back? I'm sure you made good decisions. I'm sure you made bad decisions, right? We all do. I'm sure you're like, yeah, that was a great move and that was freaking terrible. Don't ever do that. So, what
Yeah.
were the good steps that you'd recommend our listeners take when they're caught off guard to right the ship and get moving forward?
Well, I think, Mike Tyson has a great quote, and he says, "Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth."
Yeah.
And it's kind of true that it's like, what happens when the entire rug is pulled out? What happens when the medical report is bad? What happens when, you lose the job or you lose the relationship, or, there's moments like that I've had, and they're some of the hardest moments of our life. But I think the biggest thing, I mean, this might sound really simple, is just, take some deep breaths, just really try to kind of calm yourself down in the moment, and just, talk to yourself as if you talk to a friend or a child, and just say, it's going to be okay. Like, you're going to be okay. You're going to make it through this. And this has happened in my life, and I'll get into a little more of just some of the challenges I've had. But like, there's been things that I thought, oh my gosh, like this is the end of the world. Like when you're in high school or something, you're in a relationship, oh, my life is over, this thing happened or whatever. Then you realize, like, okay, your life's definitely not over. But in the moment, it can feel like that. And so I think I think for me, what I did is, it was such a hurtful, it felt very hurtful because it wasn't done in a way. It felt like, I didn't really talk publicly about this, but it was like, in a church, you have certain moral standards. And it's like, if somebody had embezzled money from the church, or if they'd had an affair or something else, then I felt like it was like the same way I was treated, but there was nothing moral that happened. It was just, oh, your numbers dropped a little bit, or, we just don't think you're a good fit here. And so that was hard. That was really, really hard. So I think, what does someone do? I think, having mentors and having support, and maybe it's family members, people around you, and reaching out and say, hey, this happened, whatever, what do you think? And just being able to share the emotion. And I think journaling and just letting yourself feel it all, because some things hit us, and they hit us really deeply. They touch a nerve, and it's a trigger. And it's like, oh man, this reminds me of something else. And there's so much sadness or anger or disappointment or whatever. And that was one of those moments for me where it was like, I don't know how to bounce back from this. And there were other opportunities. I had a couple other job opportunities where this guy from Gillette, Wyoming, the Gillette, the best a man can get, right? This is a town of like 20,000 in Wyoming. And he was like a rancher, had a church. And I was like, I just don't think I'd really fit in Gillette. I think it'd be like, I don't know. Like, I'm kind of a city guy, even Billings, Montana was kind of a stretch, and then I had other opportunities. But I think but one positive thing I did is, we just kind of fixed the house up that we were living in for 6 more months. I got a job waiting tables with some of the kids from the youth group who were also waiters. That was pretty humbling. So I had some of my leadership team that was, now I'm like their colleagues at the Olive Garden or whatever. And then we decided to move back. So I just said, we moved out for this job. Let's get back to LA. I'll kind of do some discovery, and so what I did when we moved back is just really took some time to go through things like Strengths Finder, which is like a personality gifts
Mhm.
test. There's some other things as well. Just try to figure out what really is a good fit for me. Maybe this was not the best fit. Is there something else I could do that would be a better fit? So those are a few things I think in general, when you go through a challenge or something very difficult, is to give yourself time, space, get around people that love you, can speak into your life, get in a place where you can be supported, and then be open. Just be open to what the lessons are, because there's always lessons. There's always things you can learn.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they say, and it's hard to hear when you're going through the fire, but it's been said, and I've seen it true in my own life. It's, nothing happens to us, it happens for us. And the
Yeah.
Bible phrases it much more eloquently. All things work together for good to them that love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So now, Bronson, you and your wife, you're kind of caught off guard. It really does hurt more when it's something within the church, because those are supposed to be your brothers and sisters and full trust and no immorality, no, selfishness, just purity, right? And then you
Yeah.
get caught off guard for who knows why, right? So now you're going back to LA with your wife. Where does your life go from there?
Yeah. So came back to LA, and then again after doing kind of this dark night of the soul, just kind of search, okay, what really is the best fit for me? I kind of the strengths finder test was really helpful, a couple other personality tests. I realized, maybe I could be a fundraiser, maybe I could be, and it really what kept coming up as kind of a theme was really being in sales. And I just thought to myself, I was like, sales. I was like, well, can you make any money doing that? Is that even a thing? Because I think when I was in high school, I sold cell phones, and it was kind of like it wasn't really a career. Like it was just something I did. I was good at it, but it just didn't really seem like a career. It turns out sales is like a very high, one of the most highly paid roles you can have besides owning a business in a way. But so I was considering sales, and then I was like, well, what do I want to sell? And then I had a guy like out of the blue, like at my small group, say he was in sold insurance. But he's like, you should sell medical devices. You do really well because you're smart, or whatever. And I was like, huh, medical devices. That sounds really great. So I ended up meeting a guy, just kind of a series of events here, but met a guy like a week or two after that at a church retreat, and his big tall guy named Mike. And hey, Mike, what do you do? I was like, oh, I sell medical devices. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I don't like ever met anybody who said, hey, I sell medical devices. So I said, can you get me a job? And he said, well, I can get you an interview. So I literally just met the guy. He's already told me can get me an interview. And I was bold enough to ask him. And so I ended up getting a job doing phone sales or something in medical devices, did well there for a year. And then I went on to go sell more what's called outside sales, where you go into hospitals, you go into surgery centers, you go into nursing homes, whatever, and you sell products. And so I did that, and I did very well. I went from being fired from my job as a youth pastor to about 2 years later becoming the number one person at this company of about 100 salespeople across the country, and winning awards and making six figures. And I mean, my salary as a youth pastor was 33,000 a year. And then, to go that from that, making six figures and do like it was really like it felt really honoring. And so again, there's those moments where you don't know why something happens, but then you see later and you're like, oh, okay, like that actually I did learn a lot. There were a lot of valuable lessons there that I learned. And sometimes a door will close, but there will always be another one that will open. And so it's just sometimes it's just like, okay, something closes. Okay, well, what's going to be next? What's the next door that's going to open?
Yeah, and it's not about the money. It's about fulfilling your position that God has for you and the purpose. Because I love my
Hmm.
heart, I love my kidney, and I love my liver, but they all have three distinct jobs, and you got to do what God's called you to do. So if he calls you to be a youth pastor, be a youth pastor. If he calls you to be a salesman, be a salesman. If he calls you to be a janitor, be a janitor. Just do all things as unto the Lord, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's it. I mean, and that's really what it is, right? It's just being open to God, what do you want? And I think it's hard to tell my story without acknowledging that, because and why would you want it, but just that he will do that. And so I spent about 10 years in medical device sales. I think of the 8 years that I was eligible, I won top 10% sales rep four times. And so again, I remember there's a time where I'm getting like awards and giving speeches and doing all, I mean, in front of a couple hundred colleagues and things, and just really just again, honor after honor. And so, I watch that sometimes where things happen and a setback will happen, and then there'll be something else will happen. And then just, so life, there are exciting things that can happen. I mean, somebody heard this said about life is about 98% kind of plodding along, and then you get this like kind of 2% where it's just wildly amazing, or it's just like super exciting. And so, but it's the idea of, if you're faithful, and I think especially in seasons that are really challenging, then you'll be faithful with much. You'll be faithful in other seasons as well. But I enjoyed medical sales. I enjoyed doing that for about the first 5 years. It was mostly physical therapy supplies and going in, to nursing homes, working with old people, and That was interesting. Those had some interesting stories. I worked with, like a lot of physicians and things. And then I got into the hospital, which that's an interesting story. I was queasy around blood, but I knew based on the way things were reimbursed, like in a head in my mind, I was like, I need to get into surgical sales because it's a much better place to be. They treat people better, you get paid more, it's a better kind of role. And so I get hired for this role where I'm working in basically a surgery type of product. And I'm watching the training videos at Starbucks and I'm getting queasy and I have to take breaks because I'm getting queasy around the blood. And so I went through this journey of just like having to try to work through that and like, why am I queasy? And I start going and try to get blood and I just do all these things. Like it's like this experiment through things myself, but I was able to work through it and ended up being fine. But it was also another journey of like things that if you maybe listeners come up against an obstacle like, oh, I can't do this, or I'm afraid of heights, or I'm afraid of whatever, and then I have a friend who's afraid of heights. Then he went skydiving with me and he's like, okay, I'm not afraid of heights anymore. I got it. But it takes a lot of courage to want to do that.
Yeah, no, 100%. I remember I was afraid of public speaking, which a lot of people are afraid of public speaking. I
Yeah.
never heard this before. God just laid it on my heart. And one of the things I'm worst at in the world is singing. And in college, God had me take a singing class. So 3 times a week, I publicly embarrassed myself in front of 28 girls and 2 guys and just humiliated myself for a whole semester. And after that, I
Yeah.
had no problem public speaking because if I could embarrass myself singing, I could embarrass
Yeah.
myself speaking.
Yeah. That's
So that's
amazing. Well,
awesome.
I believe too that principle exists. It's like the idea of being bold, because like if you try something new and you have a victory in one area, you can carry it over to another area. So I do Spartan races and I do these obstacle course races where I'll run 6 to 13 miles, and people are like, why would you do that? And why would you punish your body? It's like, well, because, or I do cold plunging at home. So I get in a tub that's 39 degrees for 5 minutes. And I do these things that are challenging because if I can do that and I can do something challenging, it's like writing a book isn't as hard, or having the tough conversation with somebody, or an awkward situation like that. It makes it much easier, right? So there are things that actually they become much easier as you look and see, okay, this is actually how this can work. So yeah, so I think facing fears is great. I think being able to walk forward through a difficult thing can really develop a lot of character for sure.
Yes, 100%. So now you're in surgical sales. Things are going well. At home, are you guys still just you and your wife? You having kids at this point? What's going on there, that realm?
Yeah, so about 5 years into my medical sales, I was it 5 years? I got to do the math here. It was about actually just a few years into medical sales. We had my daughter, so my daughter Ellie, she's 11 now, and then I don't know how much to get into on this, but started having some real marital challenges. Ended up, there's a lot of things we try to work through different things, and just anyway, there's years in there. I don't know if how much to share, but found okay, this just really isn't going to work. This just really isn't going to work between us, and it was really hard, really difficult. I always said, my parents are divorced. I never ever want to be divorced. I want to do everything I possibly can. And then it turns out, okay, I think we're actually going to divorce. I remember feeling that, going through that, especially as somebody who was a youth pastor who, just really I felt just a huge sense of defeat, a huge sense of loss. And, for whatever reason, whatever the reason, just going through a divorce is, am I okay with God? And, am I okay with myself? Just really a lot of feelings of shame and things, and just feeling defeated. But I think through that, there was a lot of growth that happened. And, I just really taught me, there's a lot of things taught me actually about faith, that I think if anybody's been raised in like a household that was a little more legalistic, or a little more, what do things look like? When you go through something like a divorce, it allowed me to kind of realize, I didn't realize how legalistic I was and how much I looked to my own achievements or my own ability to live well for value and worth. And at the end of the day, we're talking a lot about faith here, but the idea of like, what does it mean to be someone who's a believer, somebody who follows Jesus? It's about how good he is, and not necessarily how good we are. It's that,
Mhm.
people should, see our commitment to him, and we follow him and we point to him. And so again, lots of challenge and heartache and all kinds of stuff happen. But I think a big thing that I saw was just God's faithfulness. And then also just to see, in the middle of that, a lot of the things of my life started to develop. And I would say it led to probably the most profound growth in my life that I've experienced. So I don't wish a divorce on anyone. I think it's a terrible thing to go through for many reasons. And of course, especially having a child and other things, there's other things that are challenges there. But, I think in the middle of it, if we're open, so whether it's getting fired from a job at a church or it's going through a divorce, I think that there's growth that can happen, and it's being open to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I also, you don't have to agree. You can disagree. You can comment. You cannot comment. But I feel like as our responsibility to other generations and other people, we have listeners all over the world. Some have trusted Christ as their savior. Some come to us just for the business and life advice. Some people have an American frame of reference. Some people have a total different culture. But when it comes to marriage, for most societies, it's a vow to God, not just one another. So when we're building these, especially coming from a belief system that's a biblical worldview, divorce is absolutely devastating to the individuals if they have a true care and love for God and themselves and their spouse. And our society makes it sound like, oh, kids are, what's the word, resilient. They'll get. No, I think a ton of our problems in society today is because we have so many divorces and things are never addressed. And then as men, I feel it's our responsibility to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly so our children and future generations don't follow suit. So why I said all this is you mentioned, your mom and dad got divorced and you're in an unusual situation for our generation where you live with your dad, not your mom. And I'll be totally transparent. My mom had real issues and I ended up marrying someone just like my mother or worse. So to me, it's like I'll tell everybody, here's what I did right, here's what I did wrong, but not acknowledging the brokenness in my relationship with my mother and trying to win her approval and
Yeah.
accepting just abuse, that poised me for failure in marriage. That poised my kids to see failure in marriage. So looking back now, hindsight's 2020. Do you think there was a correlation between the failure, your relationship with your mother and the failure of your marriage?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, it's challenging to talk about because I have a lot of respect for a lot of people involved. My dad, my mom, my former spouse, and I co-parent with her now. And she's not a bad person. I think she's got a lot of amazing qualities. And I can see kind of myself. I think one thing that I learned about myself is that I was very codependent. I think because of what happened, the word codependence it really came up. It's a term that was used when somebody was an alcoholic. There was always somebody in an alcoholic's life that was supportive to that alcoholic. Now, nobody in my family is an alcoholic, but what happens is when someone kind of enables or they get worth from other people or they're finding a way to just kind of have an unhealthy relationship, that can be a very codependent thing. So the other extreme of that is narcissism. Or narcissist, that's kind of an overused term. But so I don't know. I think for me, I think there's definitely some family stuff that contributed to that. I think we're drawn to what we're familiar with. And I think there were some qualities that I was drawn to, and there's a dynamic that I contributed to as well. I don't blame myself. I don't blame her. I just say, these were some things that helped to understand why they happened. And I think that as we can look back and reflect and say, oh, okay, here's kind of why I was drawn to this person, and here's why it was unhealthy, and here's what happened. And yeah, I think 100% there's definitely things. I do think too, it's interesting when you look at the biblical framework of, it talks about in the Old Testament, somebody who's Christian or Jewish could be familiar with this, but the idea of that, like, God gives his blessing to 1,000 generations, but he doesn't clear the guilty to even the third and fourth generation. So there's this idea that things generationally can be passed down, both positive and negative. And so, and I really think that no matter what faith someone is, doing the work of going through the processing, the emotions, the pain of childhood, the trauma, the things that happen, it's some of the most spiritual work we can do. And again, I think it can be whatever faith someone is. It's just being willing to sit with the emotions. I have a good friend who's a therapist, and he says, if you actually sit and feel the emotion, you feel the sadness, you feel the loss, you feel the abandonment, whatever it is, emotions typically last for about 60 to 90 seconds is all. You actually feel them in your body, you let them come in, you feel what that feels like, and then it starts to dissipate. But people will spend years of their life and they'll drink and they'll do drugs and they'll other addictions and things to avoid feeling these feelings. Or sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So, for me, it is really sad and it's unfortunate, but I feel like going through a divorce did really help me to learn, more about, okay, what needs to get healed in my life? What are the things that I need to, how can I create a relationship that's actually a healthy relationship and not just something that is familiar. And so I think there's definitely some truth to what you're sharing. And I think that it's something that we don't really take the time to process. And I think the processing is really important.
Yeah. And for people who are single looking to get into a relationship, I mean, Bronson, you can agree or disagree, but I think we really need to reflect on why are we connected to the individual? Because, what do they say? You don't see red flags with rose-colored glasses on, right? You need
Yeah.
to really
Right.
self-reflect. And is it how the person makes you feel? Because feelings change, like Bronson just said. Our vows to God, and that's forever. And we need to be able to say, good, bad, or ugly, this is our vow. And then there's one biblical exception is adultery, but even then, God hates divorce. So when you're looking at future generations, Bronson, would you agree that they got to really look inside, like not make excuses, not be like, I'm this way because my father beat me. I'm not talking about that stuff, but be real. This is what happened. This is what I'm struggling with. Okay, this is the path out. Would you agree that's the level of introspection and making sure we're evaluating our proper motives?
Yeah. This applies to business as well. I mean, 100% what you share, but I had a conversation just today and just the last, couple of weeks, I've had a business thing I was working with somebody on, and it wasn't like we worked together for maybe a month or two, and then we realized, okay, maybe this just isn't really the right thing. And it was kind of like really getting to a place where we can have a conversation about it. Well, what really happened here? And, one thing I've really appreciated about this partner is that he has had such a mature level of introspection and saying like, oh, looking back, I can see how I did this and I want to own that. And looking back, I can see this and just really like, even what are the lessons? What are the learnings? And I've come to the point where in life, I just think it's less important. I mean, our choices are important, but I think the choices we make are less important than what we learn from the choices we make. Right.
Mhm.
We can make a good choice. We can make a bad choice. We don't, and things are never super clear. Like it's like the older I get, the more I realize there are fewer black and white things than I thought and a lot of gray out there. And, we sometimes will make the wrong choice or looking back and say, you know what, that really wasn't the right choice, but we make the best choice we can at the time. We have to be kind to ourselves, but then we can learn and say, okay, well, what would I do different? Would I do this again? Would I not? Why would I do that? Obviously, even from Christian principles, there are things we learn. People say, "Oh, well, just look to the Bible. What's in the Bible?" It's like, well, there's also some crazy stuff in the Bible. I mean, Abraham was told to offer his son to go kill his son. That's kind of a crazy story, but it's in there. And so I just realized that there are things that we have to wrestle with. We've got to pray through. We've got to really try to figure out what the right thing is to do. I mean, I use the framework of what does God want me to do? And I really try to go to that. I know you do too. And I think, but for everybody, you got to spend time and sort it out. So I think for all of us, life is a great teacher if we allow it. There's a great book by Carol Dweck called Mindset, and it talks about two mindsets. One is a fixed mindset, where when something bad happens, it reflects on me, and I'm a bad person if something bad happens. And there's something called a growth mindset, right? Growth mindset is just that everything that happens, we can learn from, and it can make us better. And so if we have a growth mindset, there's a friend of mine that says, everything in my life is either success or it's a seminar. Right. And I've had some really expensive seminars. I've lost a lot of money on some things and
Yeah.
that was, the divorce, that was an expensive seminar, and not just for money, but for emotion, for all the different things. But I learned a lot and I grew, and I've made a decision in my life that when things happen that are challenging, I want to try. I don't always do it, but I want to try to learn everything I can so that I not just don't go through it again, but so I can draw from that. and I can really let it add to my life rather than just be something that happened. And, there's a saying that, you repeat the same things unless you learn from them, right? I don't know what the quote was, or some quote that talks about, if we don't learn from our past, we're condemned to repeat it or something like that. So,
Yeah. If we don't learn from history, we're bound to repeat it. That's another
yeah,
version of that. Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
it.
let's do this. You're working medical device sales. Here's today. And I'm a little unclear when the divorce happened in there, but bring us from when you're doing medical device sales, tie that all up, and bring us through your life today.
Yeah, so that was 7 or 8 years ago. So I was doing medical sales, and then I had an interest of getting into real estate. I had the house I had owned in Montana, and just kind of had kept that and as a rental, and started buying some single family houses with a relative in another state, and that was okay. But I really wanted to, try to develop cash flow enough to be able to replace my income, to be able to, I figured if I could, a lot of people want financial freedom, but really financial freedom really is about time freedom, right? Having time, to do the things that matter to you, that are important to you, to invest in the ways you want with the people you want, or you feel meaning with, or write the book or do the things you want to do. So I wanted to do that. And so my goal was to get a bunch of single family houses, maybe like 30 houses. And so, but it wasn't going as quickly as I liked. And then I had a relative who and another relative actually who I had a chance meeting with, and I said, and I knew he did real estate, I knew he was successful. I didn't know what he did, but I said, "This is my plan." And he said, "That sounds like a lot of work to get a bunch of single family houses. Why don't you do multifamily apartments?" And I thought, well, that sounds awesome, but I said, I don't have the money. How would I do that? And he said, well, you can raise the money. So I learned about something called syndication. I learned about raising money for real estate. This was this was May of 2018. So I just kind of read every book I could find on commercial real estate and doing apartment investing. And ended up starting a meetup in the fall. So this is fall of 2018. Found my first investor there who said, "Hey, I'd invest $100,000 in one of your deals." Introduced him to a guy who had a deal. So I basically became like kind of an intermediary there. And basically it allowed me to get started in the investing world. So I did that, and then pretty quickly I found another partner about 6 months later, and we raised $15 million together, and that was a big that was a big moment for me. So, or just to make that partnership, and so then I mean, now we've raised about 40 million. I left my corporate job a couple years ago. I've just been able to do this full time. Wrote a book recently. So there's a lot of things that have happened since then, but it
Mhm.
has been a huge opportunity to learn how to raise money for real estate deals.
And just a simple, I'm going to oversimplify, and you correct me where I'm wrong. Basically, you put together the vision of what you're trying to accomplish, you break down the financial steps to get there and the plan and the timeline, and then you go to people and say, hey, would you like to invest in this project? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, yeah, it's basically finding. Initially, it was only apartment buildings. Now we're doing ATM machines and car washes and oil and gas, and we're doing senior housing. We're doing all kinds of different things that just really help people get them to their goals. Their goals.
Nice, nice. All right. And then just for my sake of compulsion, where did the divorce happen? Were you doing the pre-medical device sales? Were you doing the full medical device sales, or was this while you became an investor
Yeah, so the divorce was while I was in the middle of the medical sales stuff, kind of toward the end, and
towards the end?
then
Okay, okay.
and then I did both for a while. So I was doing medical sales, and I was trying to figure out how to grow my income through the real estate on the side as well.
Yeah, and for anybody going through a divorce, I think they'll understand, male or female, sometimes what you were doing at the time of the divorce, you just want nothing to do with that life at all. It's like almost
Yeah.
like you want to transition into a new career, correct?
Yeah. 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 I mean,
Yeah.
it can be. It wasn't much for me with that, but it was more, I just had bigger dreams and goals and things I wanted to do. And I think I got going through the divorce as well as kind of getting close to age 40. I was like, life's just too short not to go after the things that we have dreams about. I don't want to be 70, 80 years old and think, man, I just wish I had tried. And say the biggest regrets people have are, it's not the things that you did and you failed at, it's things you didn't even try, that you didn't
Yeah.
didn't go for. So to me, I was like, I'm just going to go for it. And I'm really glad I've gone for it.
Yeah, me too, man. And we're here today. So between
Yeah.
your birth and today, Bronson, is there anything we missed or any final thoughts you want to cover before we transition to where you are today, where you're heading?
But yeah, I think there's lessons, I think, really, I think a couple things like I mentioned about the getting fired from my job at the church, it seems like not a big deal. It was a really big deal for me, having gotten married and, owned a house, and just, this is my dream and everything, as well as going through a divorce. Those are a couple big things that happened in my life, but it has taken time. But I feel like with both of those now, I've just seen God really, like, kind of in a way just teach me a lot through those things, and he talks about working all things for good. So seeing how things can be worked for good. And it's even in the moment where you have no way how that, you don't know how that can happen, and it can take time, it can even take years. And so I think that's one theme that comes up for me. And then just seeing too that, if you follow God, it's like he does have a good plan for my life. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be, some of think it's going to be rainbows and butterflies all the time, but it's at least we have God with us to help us. At least we're not alone, and that's huge. Obviously, everybody has other people, and that's a big resource. But when you have God and you know that He's walking before you and kind of just is there for you every step, it's a huge comfort. So I think those are a couple of big things, lessons that I kind of gather from my story.
Nice. Yeah. If anybody teaches a straight prosperity gospel, they clearly haven't read their Bible, because every great
Yeah.
man and woman in the Bible went through some rough times. And it doesn't mean God doesn't want us to be prosperous, but there's a journey, like, I mean, you've gone through it, I've gone through it, our listeners have gone through it, but don't live in a delusional state. Because if you grew up, I think you mentioned it earlier, sometimes we grow up in a religious setting, and it's basically, if good things happen, you're right with God. If bad things happen, you're not right with God.
Yeah.
And that's not biblical, because there's a lot
Hmm.
of great people who have rough lives. And there's a lot
Yeah.
of terrible people who say they're a Christian and get their $8 coffee on Sunday in church, and they're scumbags. So
Mm.
your prosperity doesn't reflect how God views you. And that's what we have to
Yeah.
remember. So
Exactly.
yeah, so go ahead.
Well, I just gonna agree with what you shared. Yeah, I think absolutely 100%.
Yeah. So we have a lot of, I mean, today in our churches, they're filled with people, and the Bible talks about it. It says in the end times, many are going to say, Lord, Lord. And he's going to say, I never knew thee. And our churches
Mm.
are filled with pretty Christians, people who
Mm.
seem shiny on the outside and they're a big rolled turd on the inside. So
Hmm.
we got to be careful. That's not who we are. That's our
Hmm.
responsibility. So,
Hmm.
Bronson, today, where are you today? Where are you heading? And how can we as a remarkable community help you get there?
Yeah. So today, yeah, just continuing to create, continuing to, really our goal in the business is to help people to develop passive income so they can quit a job or retire or go spend time with family or write the book or do the things. I think that, most people don't like their jobs. They don't feel a sense of engagement or fulfillment in their jobs. And so I think, if I can help people to start developing passive income, particularly we've seen it with a lot of high earners that are like, well, if I sell my business or if I quit my job, how do I make money? And Wall Street doesn't offer really good options for that. So we have other things that we do. And then behind me on the shelf, I've got this book, Fire Yourself, that I created that just kind of talks about how to get started at that. Now I've had over 1,500 one-on-one phone calls or Zoom calls with high net worth investors. And so a lot of people are trying to figure out how to reduce taxes or grow wealth, or maybe somebody has a money person or a financial advisor. And I was, for a little while, kind of, sorry I didn't share this, I was an investment advisor while doing the medical sales for a little bit, and it was called a RIA, or a registered investment advisor. Well, I'm still an RIA, but I call it a recovering investment advisor. So I find that, being from Wall Street versus being in Main Street is just a much better type of place to be. You get, there's better returns, better cash flow, there's a lot more safety there, and it's just a much more aligned interest. So that's kind of where I'm at, and then really where we're headed. It's just my goal is to try to help as many people as we can to, have the ability to pursue what they're here to do. So really help them discover their purpose, their vision, their dream, and go for it. And hopefully my life will inspire that, as well as just, give people opportunities that if people can start to develop passive income and develop that muscle, because it's like a muscle until you kind of get used to working it out, you don't even know it's
Hmm.
there. And then they can actually get to where they could potentially replace their income, or maybe just replace their expenses, and they can live a different life. So that's really the goal. And then just want to continue to create things in that space that can really help people. My big why, kind of at the end of all of this, is I want to really end modern day human slavery in the world. There's about 20 to 40 million human slaves today, more than there's ever been in the history of the world. It's about 3 times the size of Los Angeles, the greater Los Angeles area. And it's just hard to believe there's this many, but there's so many. And it's in every country of the world, just about every city of the world. And some of the stories are just absolutely heartbreaking. And that's really a big why for me that I want to, give my life to.
Yeah, it's a noble cause. We just had Lena Sabula on last week, and she was a sex slave and trafficked for
Mm,
years. And
mm,
if you think you're a Christian and you know how God works, you need to listen to that episode because her bodyguard was a Christian for 2 years in the brothel. And he's the one that showed her Christ and led her to the Lord. And you're like, what kind of Christian would work in a brothel? Go listen to the episode and find out. So
mm,
you're spot on, man. There's so many people, slaves and bigotry and hate, and it's nothing to do with anybody but ourselves today and loving those around us. But you can be Italian, you can be Chinese, you can be Australian, and people hate each other within their own country and they're selling each other, and it's terrible.
hmm Yeah, it
So
does.
now, if somebody wants to reach out to you, Bronson, whether it's for business, for personal, whether it's to get involved in helping stop, slavery, what's the best way for them to reach you?
So there's a lot of ways. I'm on all the social media. It's just Bronson Hill. You can go to my website, bronsonequity.com. I've got my book, the first couple chapters there, Fire Yourself. You can download it there. You also get it on Amazon, the full version, or on Audible. If you want to shoot me an email, you can send it to my team, just admin@bronsonequity.com.
Very nice, my friend. It's been an honor again to talk to you again today, Bronson. And like I said, between your birth and today and everything in between, or just a final thought, is there anything that we missed or you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think I would appreciate you doing this, David. This is a great, it's very cathartic to just kind of talk through things that happen in, my life. I don't really usually go through that story, but it's awesome. And for anybody listening, I just hope that for each of you, you see God's hand in your story. And even if you can't, sometimes we don't always understand the way, but if we can understand who God is and just that he is a loving God, then all of these things somehow, even if they're bad things, can somehow work together in a positive way to help us, or maybe to help us help others. So I just hope for each listener that, yeah, that you see, God has a plan for your life.
Amen. And that's 100% true. And the thing is, we don't have to do anything. We just have to be. But then at the same time, we have to take action, right? There's that balance. Live like we're going to be here 100 years and live like today's our last day. The whole Bible talks about faith, like Bronson mentioned in Hebrews 11 earlier. And it also talks about balance, finding that balance in life. And like our slogan says, don't just listen to this great advice Bronson gave you, but do it. Repeat it each day so you can have a great life in this world, but more importantly, in eternity to come. So I'm David Pasquale. This is our remarkable friend, Bronson Hill. Bronson, thank you again for being here today, my friend.
Thanks so much, David. I really enjoyed this. Thanks a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, we love you. Reach out to Bronson or myself if you need anything. Reach out to God, especially because he can help you more than we can. We love you, and we'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.